Hello everyone, and welcome to Anarchism An Introduction. If you're here from my previous video, the MAGA Cringe compilation, first of all, welcome to the channel, and welcome to the other side of my content. So I hope you stick around. Anyway, people hear of anarchy, they think chaos, riots, violence, and I guess if you're Tim Pool, you think of Antifa. Even Joe Biden said the other day that, we need to stop these anarchists, they're running around the streets, we've got to stop them. But what actually is the political ideology of anarchism? From a light introduction with Robert Wolff to about as extreme as it gets with Max Stirner, let's jump into it. Before we move on to that, I've taken off my Hawaiian shirt, so this is very serious. As you can see here, basically no one who watches these videos is subscribed, so if you're liking what you're watching, you're enjoying the content, you want to see more, or you just want to give me like a little endorphin boost for my day, a little bit of dopamine right here, right there, that would be amazing. So yeah, just look down there, subscribe, go on. Yeah, go on. Anyway, let's do this. If you're boring and just want to use Wikipedia, the definition of anarchism is the state of a society being freely constituted without authorities or governing body. Basically just a society without a state. You know what? You can do that on your own. You don't need me to do it. So what I'm going to do is present you with a thinker to provide, a sort of an introduction for the layman to what anarchism is. And this thinker is Robert Wolff. In Wolff's book, In Defense of Anarchism, he establishes one of the most digestible arguments against the existence of a state. And this is all through an idea of a moral obligation for autonomy. The argument is as follows. All humans have a choice over the actions that they take, i.e. humans have free will. Nothing that controversial yet. The fact that we can make these decisions means that we are responsible for the outcomes of our actions. Whilst this isn't that explicitly brought out in the text, I would sort of interpret this in kind of a utilitarian framework, which is that since we can make the decisions of what we want to do, we are responsible for the consequences of our actions, and therefore we have to try and maximize the good that comes from our decisions. Meaning that if one were to be morally good, they must at least try to achieve the best outcomes of the actions they take. And in this sense, a person would, as Wolff would say, take responsibility for their actions. Wolff talks a lot about sort of being the responsible person, the moral person being one who takes ownership of the decisions that they make and tries to make the right ones, essentially. And then in order to try and achieve maximization of utility, in order to try and make the best decisions that one thinks they must do, one has to be able to act independently. One can only take responsibility for one's actions if they recognize themselves as the final decision maker or the final arbiter of their actions. A person must be self-legislating, as Wolff would put it, to satisfy the utilitarian demand to try and act best at maximize outcomes. This is once again, in a Mill sense, one must be independent in their decisions. As trusting others is difficult, one must trust their own judgment for what is right. So the only way to act so as to maximize utility is to act how you think you should. In this sense, providing a moral obligation for autonomy. There is a moral obligation to be autonomous so that one can maximize the outcome of their actions. There we kind of see a utilitarian justification for a moral obligation to be autonomous, to be independent, to be an individual. And finally, the defining mark of political authority to Wolff is the right to rule, and correlatively the right to be obeyed. At the same time, individuals have a moral duty to act autonomously. This draws a conflict with a state, as no one individual can satisfy this moral obligation for autonomy and submit themselves to a state, making the power of a state illegitimate. For man to be able to fulfill his obligation to make himself the author of his decisions, he will resist the state's claim to have authority over him. If a state tells you to do something, but you don't think that's what you should be doing, then this is a bad thing, basically. No one can satisfy the moral obligation to be autonomous to make the best decisions and submit themselves to a state. Therefore, all states would be, in this sense, illegitimate. And according to Wolff, this was established what's called an a priori anarchist critique. One that not only invalidates states that we see today or in history, but one that would invalidate any hypothetical state that we could potentially conceive of. So that is Wolff's argument. However, if you ask me, it's a little bit boring. A little bit milquetoast, in my opinion, and as Simmons pointed out, one can conceive of a society which satisfies this moral obligation. In like a say, more a voluntarist, like a right libertarian minarchist society, where, you only engage in something under consensual contractual agreements. So really, whilst Wolff wants to establish this a priori conception of anarchism, it seems to be more of what we would call an a posteriori, I've probably pronounced that wrong, anarchist critique, meaning one that succeeds in delegitimizing all states that currently are in the world, but not ones that can be hypothetically conceived. So that's Wolff's argument there. Let's make things a little bit more fun. Let's just make things a little bit more wacky. Oh god, I'm very sorry for this, but I've written it in the script, so I'm doing it anyway. From milquetoast anarchism to the extreme, Max Stirner. Stirner's seminal piece, which I have right here in my hand, which is called The Ego and Its Own, is in my opinion, whilst rather wacky, one of the most fearsome attacks on authoritarianism in political history, and was surprisingly very much enjoyed by Engels, who apparently was almost convinced to become an anarchist from this book, which must be quite a feat for one of the co-founders of communism. Another little aside, Marx very much disliked Stirner's work and Stirner's writings, so you know, a little bit of travel in paradise there for the Marxist amongst us. Stirner has been massively influential from his form of individualistic egoism, a rather extreme form of anarchism, which not only rejects the state, but almost all forms of power structures or restrictions upon personal freedom that one can conceive. Stirner proposes that the most commonly accepted social institutions, including, you know, a state, property as a right, don't get too excited communists, natural rights in general, and the very notion of society were mere illusions or ghosts, denoting them as spooks, a rather racially charged term there, in the mind, saying of society that the individuals are its reality. Stirner wants to abolish not only the state, but also society as an institution responsible for its members. Stirner's radical views are well demonstrated by his rejection of even morality or morals as merely a limit upon the freedom of an individual. Generally, when anarchists want to ask, well, how we, you know, enforce rules upon people, they tend to go with things like, you know, social enforcement, things like manners, how there's no laws that you have to be polite to someone, but socially one is, you know, I guess, pressured into being polite, and that sort of keeps society orderly. Stirner would reject things like manners or morality as mere spooks in the brain, as mere ghosts that are inhibiting one's personal advancement. One can sort of see how this ideology would be very inspirational over Nietzsche, whose idea of an Übermensch, you know, the individual striving ahead without impediments to their actions. If we were going to look at, you know, a political spectrum, which I'm sure I have right here now, is right down there at the bottom. The center of anarchism, as far, probably beyond the spectrum, probably beyond where my hand can be shown by the screen. Stirner represents the absolute maximization of the individual beyond anything else, even beyond a sense of equality. For example, an anarcho-communist would value the individual in the same sense that everyone is equally valued and needs to be treated as such. Every individual is equally important and therefore needs to be acknowledged as such in society. While Stirner would say no, only the personal individual matters, nothing else. And this is sort of where the idea of egoism comes in. It's only your own individual self that really matters. Everything else, which is influencing sort of your decision making, spooks, ghosts, shouldn't be there, bad. Whilst there's far too much for me to dive into in a single video, let it just be known that Wolff and Stirner would probably not get along very much. Stirner's radical individualistic egoism is very interesting, but so extreme that it is almost difficult to conceive of. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this quick journey across the, you know, the anarchy spectrum. You know, from the milquetoast sort of introductory stuff with Wolff to the wacky individualistic egoism we see with Stirner. If you want to see a full video on Max Stirner, I would be more than happy to make that. You know, throw a comment down below if you want to see that happening. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have enjoyed it, maybe throw a like, maybe throw a comment, maybe even throw a subscribe. You know, once again, I need some more dopamine in my life. Just throw it my way. It would be appreciated. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed.